Hey everybody. So I wrote a blog post and somebody asked me if I would actually do a little video about it. And so here goes. So my last time in prison, I befriended an old man, and his name was Cleo, and Cleo was doing 5 life sentences. And so this man was what they called an OG, right? Or an original gangster. I mean, he'd been doing he'd been in the streets and been doing this before I was even born. And he got a lot of respect in prison. He had his hand in a lot of cookie jars, and he told me so many stories about his life. And he even opened up to me at one point, and he told me some very personal traumas and abuse that he suffered. And our friendship in that time, it began like to flourish, right? Because one of the young men that kind of worked for Cleo got close to me. And because I was openly homosexual, I was a transgender, that was kind of a big deal for certain people, especially those who were involved in gangs and in the brotherhoods and stuff like that. So while it wasn't completely frowned upon by those gangs and stuff, it did have to be approved if a member of a certain gang wanted to be in an exclusive relationship with a homosexual or a transgender. And so Cleo, the crime boss, right, the OG, he wanted to have a sit down with me, and he wanted to talk about the rules of me being able to be in an open relationship, or to be the partner of one of his quote unquote soldiers. And so we ended up being pretty close friends, Cleo and I did. And Cleo told me, gosh, he told me so much. But one of the most important stories or situations that he told me about that I believe is very important for right now, and as far as like us grasping or comprehending, having some understanding of what is going on right now in the world, and why we see so many corrupt judges and corrupt police officers and corrupt correctional officers and all of this stuff. And so he told me about a dark plan of infiltration by crime families, by gangsters and pimps and sex traffickers, both child traffickers and adult traffickers, and anyone else that lived the life of crime. And so I'm going to refer to all these criminals, right, as crime bosses or families that, for this stream from here on out. So Cleo told me how, since the 1960s, crime bosses have made plans to infiltrate police departments, correctional facilities, even the legal system, like courts, legal aids, lawyers, judges, clerks, etc. Yeah, and even politics. Cleo told me how he himself had recruited young people, especially young women, that had no criminal records. He said that pimps had already been doing this for many, many, many years before he even got into the game. And that's how he learned about doing this infiltration, this corruption by infiltration. So what they do is they take young people, right? They become their families, which is what a lot of gangs do, especially in the streets. And then they make sure that these young people, they study and they graduate and they further their education to make sure that they can attain very specific jobs and positions of power, like jobs that would be helpful to their family, right? And it made so much sense to me, because I had always wondered like how inmates and convicts had gained so much favor with very certain very specific like correctional officers throughout my entire teenage and adult years, because I was in and out of juvenile detention, of the county jails and the state prison. So this was making so much sense to me. It was giving me clarity, right? So now I knew how there were officers bringing cell phones and drugs and so much more, right, to inmates out of loyalty. Now I could grasp the facts of how there were so many police officers and prison officers and prison staff, like nurses and doctors, even like food staff, like the food companies that bring the food in from the outside, and even administration, like the administrative staff, bringing items in and engaging in sexual relationships with convicts. So now I could understand how there were so many corrupt officers, right? Police, correctional, court officers, etc., that had actually used me for sexual pleasure during my stays and my time on the streets and in jail. So it made sense to me, like, wow, okay, so these weren't really people who wanted to be first responders and help serve and protect people. They were criminals that were placed in these positions. So of course they would want to abuse their power and use individuals for sex or for whatever. And so, the understanding that came with that was amazing. Um, I mean, like, really amazing. It was there. This was a huge amount of information. It was really a huge amount of confidence that Cleo had placed within me. Cleo told me how he had employees, as he called them most of the time, that had become legal aid attorneys and correctional officers and administrative staff within the prison system, first responders. We're talking like, all kinds of things. So this was some serious stuff. This was some really serious stuff. So, I mean, just imagine, right, that you are taken off the streets, or taken, right, even if you were trafficked, and you got so close to these people, because that's what they do. They become your everything, your family, your whole world. And then these people wanted you to further your education and do good and not get in trouble. And all of this time, it was because they really just wanted to place you in a position of power, or in a very specific job, just so that they could get you to do whatever they wanted you to do in that job, right? I mean, and so this is what happened. This is what was going on. So the weight of that kind of confidence, like, I was like, wow, this is crazy. But this is exactly what was realistic. This was reality, right? And so Cleo, he had all of these people in all of these different positions before he ever even went to prison for the first time. And he had mentioned how there was an Irish mafia guy that had a few of his quote unquote employees actually in Washington, D.C., in the White House, embedded into the political world. I mean, it's not like a far stretch, right, to imagine that there are actual criminals that are politicians in the White House. Like, hello, that's not really hard to believe. Right. So, but Cleo just opened up, and he told me a lot of stuff. And as it turns out, like, Cleo was a victim. He was a victim of this world. He was a victim of circumstance. His mother was a drug addict. His mother rented him out as an incredibly young child. He had no idea who his father was, and He doubted even his mother knew. Cleo sold drugs by the age of 10, and he was on his own, living on his own by the age of 12. And then he really opened up and he told me how, excuse me, how he had engaged in all kinds of activities, right? But even homosexual sex acts as a child, because they paid him a lot of money and they helped him buy bulk drugs, and they helped him get everything that his age hindered him from getting and more. And he also told me that if I wanted to, because, you know, like the whole reason that Cleo and I became friends, excuse me, is because I had to sit down with Cleo because one of Cleo's soldiers wanted to be with me, like in a relationship. And of course, I was homosexual, transgender, trans identified at the time, and I was in prison. So it tells you this was a long time ago. And because one of his soldiers wanted to be in a relationship with me, I had to sit down with, with Cleo. And so Cleo was, I mean, and even though I felt like we were friends, he didn't sugarcoat anything, right? He told me that if I wanted to see Nick, that, and if I was caught messing around with anyone else, that he would have me taken out. He would have me killed. He would have me shanked. And I believed him. I knew it was the truth. I mean, I seen all kinds of stuff when I was in there. And so, and I don't want to focus too much on the giving the enemy that much time, but ever since that I've been saved, right? I've sent letters and to Cleo. He never responded, but I send letters out to a lot of people. And so when I first got saved in 2010, I began writing letters and sending cards and reaching out to all kinds of individuals that I had befriended while I was in prison, or, even people that I had met and like connected with, and that shared, because a lot of people in prison ended up sharing a lot of really horrible things with me about their lives. And I guess I was easy to talk to. And so I told all of them in these letters and in these cards of how I got saved, right? And how they could too be made free from all that weighed on their shoulders. And a few respond here and there, but nothing like too in depth, really. There are a few that we write at least monthly, and pretty in depth, pretty deep stuff, but it's not a lot. Mostly I send out cards on like birthdays, and I send a letter every month or two, or maybe three, just to let them know that, they're in my thoughts and prayers. A couple times I've been asked, don't write me again. A couple times they refused my mail at the prison, so then it would be returned to me. But it's just what we're supposed to be doing, right? Reaching out to people, trying to establish connections or bonds with people who don't think like we think. Even though they used to think like I think, right? Because I used to think like them, I should say, and I no longer do. But and all of this came to surface, right? Because I keep tabs on individuals. I did keep tabs on Nick as well, the soldier mentioned above, and I used to send him letters and cards, and a couple times he responded. And the other day, well, about a week or so now ago, I got a letter from an individual that informed me that Nick had been murdered, that he had died, that he had complications after being shot during some type of robbery. It was a drug deal or something. So And I've always tried to convince Nick and other people that they could do so much better and become new men, if only, right? If only he would leave Florida, if only he would surrender to the Christ, if only he would believe in himself and know that there's just so much more to life than what he has been dealt. And and so that's really what the issue for a lot of them is they were dealt. You know, a lot of people, self included, have been through things that the average person couldn't grasp or comprehend or understand. Um, they see a lot of our actions, especially when we have criminal records, and they say, "Oh my gosh, that's the worst, most horrible thing," right? And I remember that Nick was in prison for murdering his sister's rapist. And so Nick shot and killed this man when he was a teenager. And he didn't have a problem doing so because his sister's rapist was also his own abuser as well. Um, so Nick was charged. He was sentenced and charged as an adult. Um, and like Cleo, you know, and Nick, there are so many people that share so many personal and private things with me. And I also shared, you know, personal, private things with them. And I think maybe that's where the connection came, because even before I got saved, I didn't have a problem talking about the abuse. I didn't have a problem being transparent and opening up. Um, I know, like, a lot of people don't grasp. Because then I was like wondering when I got this letter, I was like, well, wow, you know, what about his kids? Because Nick had like 5 or 6 kids. And like, gosh, now they're going to grow up without a father. And it's like the pattern, right, repeats itself. Um, and it's like there's so much in this, right? Because what a lot of people don't really grasp is in prison, there's this what they call code of silence, right? And so it's okay for like gangsters and Muslims and even like imams and well-known men of power to engage in relations with homosexuals or trans-identified individuals, as long as they never mention it on the outside of the prison walls, right? So the motto in prison is, what happens behind the walls stays behind the walls. So I mean, I'm going to continue to write letters and send cards to people because, look, I know what it's like to hear your name called out. I know what it's like to hear your name called at mail call. And I saw too many people. I mean, there were people that I saw there that just I think my last bid I was like 2 years, just a little over 2 years. And there were some people there, young people, that never got one letter in the mail. And I mean, that's kind of like heartbreaking to think, like, gosh, these people have to have families, but not one letter, not one correspondence, never a visit. And so I remember that because my family was all out of state, I didn't have any visitors, but I got mail almost every day. And I remember that Cleo had one of his wives. Yeah, that's how they referred to them. They were the girls that worked for him. One of his prostitutes. She got on my visitors list. She came to visit me like once a month. She would come and we would sit in the visitors room and hang out and talk and laugh and just chit chat. But I mean, gosh, you're talking like this is serious, in-depth exposure, right? This is big. This is something that a lot of people don't comprehend. And I actually received an email yesterday after so everything that I'm talking about here, the corruption by infiltration and how they did it, I made a post on my Substack, and I also sent it out as an email. And so the next day, one of the subscribers, a sister in the Christ, has sent me an email of a headline about a nurse that was accused of smuggling overdose causing drugs into the South Dakota prison. So what I'm really trying to stress here is that's not uncommon. It's actually pretty common. You have officers that are having relationships with inmates where it's kind of known. You have administrative staff and Department of Corrections staff, like the people that bring the food, in, them. Some of them employees would bring things in, would pass things off, would have relationships with inmates. So it's like, this is really important. And it's kind of like weird. Like, I mean, I talk about everything, but I've never really even thought about talking about all this like this. And so I think it's really important because it gives us an idea of why we see so many corrupt judges, right? I mean, we have people that are letting criminals back out on the street 20, 30, 40 times until they kill somebody or until they get caught killing somebody. And it makes, major national news or something. So it's just kind of crazy. But this is why we have this. This is why this is going on. How you doing, Jen? And so it's really important that we grasp all of this. And so I'm going to pop into the notes the link for the Substack. I think it might already be I'm going to pop it up in the chat. I mean, for the actual Substack post, it is in the chat. So if you want to read it and comment, then feel free to do so. Other than that, I'm going to bounce because I got a lot going on. All right. And so y'all remain blessed, and catch you when I catch you. Peace.